And then bless you.
Thank you, Dada.
Somebody will have to
Turn it on.
turn it off and zero in on a spot for me. I'm going to have somebody zero in on this. This is my
US of A?
not yet.
I can't even see. Where's the J button on top?
On the top.
Okay.
Practice in. All right. Okay.
Okay.
All right.
The gas in your spot.
Do you know that there are millions of Americans every year that cannot vote? That is right. There are laws almost in every state that have either lifetime bans or a ban of some kind on felons and ex-felons that basically take their right away to vote. How do I know what I'm talking about? I am one whose rights was taken away. Yes, I am an ex-felon and have done extensive study on disenfranchisement laws here in America. There are approximately 5 million Americans that cannot vote during any given election year. These laws take the basic right of every American, sometimes for a lifetime, and can be for a mistake that they made many, many years ago. Now let me tell you about these laws and how it affects millions of men and women throughout the country and what, in fact, we can do about it. There are approximately 5 million Americans that cannot vote here in the United States. Nationally, it is estimated that 5.3 million Americans are denied the right to vote because of laws that prohibit voting by people with felon convictions. According to the Sentencing Project, there are estimated 5.3 Americans that cannot vote because of felonies, which 13% are black. And this is also a number by various other organizations, such as the Brenham Center for Justice at the University of New York, and as well as a lot of our government agencies use in reporting on their reports. Each state has its own laws that deal with the voting rights of felons and ex-felonies. There are 48 states in the District of Columbia which prohibit inmates from voting while incarcerated for a felony conviction. Only 2 states, Maine and Vermont, permit inmates to vote, while 36 states prohibit felons from voting while they're on parole, and 31 of these states exclude felon probationaries as well. These states deny the right to vote to all ex-offenders who have completed their sentence. 3 states. 9 others disenfranchise certain categories of ex-offenders and or permit application for restoration of rights for specific offenses after a waiting period. 5 years in Delaware and Wyoming, 3 years in Maryland, and 2 years in Nebraska. Here in Indiana, upon completion of the sentence, your voting rights are restored. And here I have a map of the felony disenfranchisement laws throughout the United States. And again, you can see Florida, Kentucky, and Vermont are the 3 that have a lifetime ban on felon convictions. In other words, if you have a felony in any of those 3 states, you can never, ever vote. And I kind of think that's ironic that we would block anybody from voting. And according to other studies, the United States has the largest non-voting bloc of any democratic society in the world. I mean, you think about that. We're a free country, free society, freedom, and yet we have more non-voters than any other country in the world that has a democracy. Jeff Manza, PhD, Professor of Sociology and Political Science at the Institute for Policy Research at Northwestern University, and Christopher Eugen, PhD, Distinguished McKnight Professor of Sociology at the University of Minnesota, stated in the 2006 book, Locked Out, Felon Disenfranchisement in American Democracy, They stated many countries, including a number of European democracies, allow all criminal offenders, even those currently in prison, to vote. Israel, Canada, and South Africa allow current inmates to vote on the basis of recent High Court rulings. A group of other European nations, as well as Australia and New Zealand, disenfranchise only some current inmates. In these countries, restrictions on prisoners voting are typically based on either the length of the sentence, the nature of the crime committed, or the type of election. 9 European countries bar all or current prisoners from voting, but only a handful place any restrictions on non-incarcerated felons. And most of these apply only to a small minority of offenders. And again, when you think about the United States having and being the leader of the free society in the world, it's hard to imagine that we actually lead the world in non-voting, people not allowing them to vote, especially after their incarceration. And we also see that even though these laws were made to give us a freedom according to the 15th Amendment, unfortunately the blacks have the largest majority of non-voters in the country. And there are statistics that show that 40% of all blacks that are born, say now, will probably be part of the non-voting bloc and be incarcerated. And so those are other statistics that are pretty mind-boggling. And when people are involved in the community, it keeps down the amount of recidivism. The more people are involved in their society, the less likely they are to recommit a crime. Continuate a felon disenfranchisement sends a negative and hypocritical message to citizens. It fails to recognize felons' performance in completing their sentence, including a period of supervision in the community on probation or parole. Although sentences may be completed and individuals are free from correctional supervision, they remain disadvantaged and carry less than complete rights of citizenship, according to the federal probation report that was basically done on felons in Kentucky, and how in fact it affects the voting and their lifestyles. Disenfranchisement separates them from community life and continues a stigma of conviction in the future. Felon disenfranchisement is an invisible punishment and a barrier to rehabilitation. In fact, research results indicate that former felons who do have the right to vote have lower repeat offenders than those that have their rights taken away. And again, as I close, it's hard to imagine that we live in this free society, and yet we have 5 million people who cannot vote, and some of those will be for a lifetime. And again, I personally know what the stigma is of being a convicted felon and not having this right. And when you think about it, it's like a double jeopardy. In fact, even though they've completed their sentences, they're still paying for a crime, even though it supposedly is paid for. And I was thinking about how many that get out of prison, go work, pay their taxes and everything, and yet they don't have the basic right to vote. And that reminds me of the Boston Tea Party. Why did we have the Boston Tea Party? Because of taxation without representation. And yet there's a large majority of felons that have exactly that, have no rights, even though they pay their share of taxes. And so what can we do? Well, one thing that we can do is there is some laws now that are moving toward and through Congress that are to reinstate everyone's basic rights to vote. And so what we need to do is get over our Congress and our senators and tell them to support this. Because we